Okay, hey everybody. Welcome to another installation in my mix breakdown video series. Today I'm going to be talking about a song by an amazing artist, Kendall Raesunnie, called Butterfly that I recently mixed. The song is fantastic. The production, the arrangement, the writing, the performances, and yeah, I had a great time working on this one, and I'm excited to talk about it. I'm just going to start this video off like I've done all the other ones, which is just by playing Kendall's rough mix, and then talking about things that I liked about it, things that I wanted to improve. And then I'm going to play a portion of my finished mix so you can get a sense of where I took things. And then I'll dive into specifics about processing and my approach with the mix. But let's just listen to Kendall's rough. By the way, if I'm looking down a bunch throughout the course of this video, it's just because I have a bunch of notes written down on my phone. But yeah, let's go ahead and listen to Kendall's rough mix.
Hey, stranger, I wish that I could know you and never ever change you. Oh, hey, 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 loner, I wish that I could know you beneath your surface. And by the way, you got nothing to hide inside. Won't see it clearly, yeah, won't see you way spread out. But I know the world hasn't been too kind to the outcasts and to the misfits and to the ones who can't find a box to fit in, box to fit in. Butterfly, open up, you gotta know when to live, more than you lived before. Doesn't matter what the past is, you don't wanna miss the chance to be loved. Hey, so butterfly, open up, gotta know when to live, lay got down on the floor. Doesn't matter what the past is, you don't wanna miss the chance to be loved. You're trapped behind your opaque little wall. There's inside of you, you're afraid they will find out.
Cool. So yeah, that's the mix that Kendall sent me. I hopefully you can tell. I mean, my approach with this was one of enhancing what was already there, as opposed to a lot of fix-it work to get it to a sort of passable level. Like I said, the production and the sounds and the arrangement is all great, and so my role in this case was just to enhance what was already there. So for things that I have written down, things that I like about the rough mix, the first thing I have is that I love the vocal performance. I think Kendall's both the sort of quality and performance is of the vocal is fantastic, and I want to make sure that I keep the vocal right up front and center. One thing I'll say about the rough mix is that a lot of elements, but especially the vocal, are very compressed, and I feel that works stylistically for the song. That makes a lot of sense, but I want to make sure that I wanted to make sure that whatever compression I applied was sort of gluey and grabby, and articulates the sort of attack and front ends of words, as opposed to just kind of clamping down and making things feel sort of small. So that's something that I wanted to pay attention to. Another thing that I have written down is that I love the drum programming, and I wanted to make sure that whatever I did sort of accentuated or at least honored the sort of playfulness of the drums, and the syncopation and the groove. Things that I have written down for things I wanted to change, I like how separate all the elements are, but I felt like certain elements feel a little bit superimposed, especially some of the percussion elements. I think I thought it was important to preserve a lot of element separation, but at the same time, I wanted everything to feel cohesive and like it was, living in the same sort of sonic world. The other thing I have written down is that, while I like the lead vocal, I felt it was a little bit bright, especially as it relates to the upper mid-range and high frequencies in the percussion and drums. So I wanted to make sure that I just tamed some of that harshness. Another thing I have written down is that the center felt just a little bit like the center image felt just a little clogged, like too many things were happening in the center, and I thought that by opening up the stereo field, um, I could get the mix sounding more open, but also cater to that idea of element separation. If everything has a separate, um, distinct place in the stereo field, things will sound more separated and clear. And then the last thing I have written down is that I just wanted to make, like I said, I really like the drum programming, but I thought that I could just make the drums hit a little bit harder, feel a little bit more chesty, a little bit more sort of fortified in the low end. So yeah, that's everything that I have written down. I'm gonna go ahead and play my finished mix so you can hear where I took things. I'm just gonna start from the pre-chorus and I'll take it into a little bit into second verse. So here's what I did with the mix.
To the outcasts and to the misfits and to the ones who can't find a box to fit in. Box to fit in. Butterfly, open up. You gotta know when to live. More than you lived before. Doesn't matter what the past is. You don't wanna miss the chance to be loved. Hey, so butterfly, open up. Gotta know when to live. Lay your guard down on the floor. Doesn't matter what the past is. You don't wanna miss the chance to be loved. You're trapped behind your opaque little wall. There's inside of you, you're afraid they will find him. Or prescribe a little verdict, try to hide it. But I got you, someone to confide in. By the way, there's nothing wrong with your jagged lines. Got something inside you that they...
Cool. So yeah, hopefully that gives you a sense of where I took things with the mix. I'm just gonna go right into sort of specifics. Before I get into drums, I'm just gonna talk about my sort of session setup and approach to routing. I'm not gonna go too in depth with this because I've talked about it in previous videos, but the gist of it is basically that each instrumental subgrouping is routed to its own discrete bus, and those buses are all subsequently routed and summed, down the line in the session. So what that looks like is, all my drums get routed to their own discrete drum bus. In this case, that they're sub buses, right? Like all the kicks are routed to a bus, and then that bus goes to the drum bus. But all the drums eventually end at an all drums bus. All the percussion always ends at a percussion bus, bass, guitar bus, so on and so forth. The other thing is that all of my instrumental subgroupings are color coded. The drums are red always, percussion is orange always, bass is blue always, guitar green, and that just helps me keep track of things in the session and move really quickly. I definitely don't think that my template is the best template. I don't think there really is such a thing as the best template. I think the best template is whatever works for you. But I am a strong advocate of having templates. It's just because you have a template doesn't mean that you're applying the same processing every time into every mix. It's not like you're employing some kind of cookie cutter approach. It just makes it easier to set sessions up and to move quickly when you don't have to, constantly be setting up sort of session architecture if you already have a system in place. I think it makes a world of difference. So that's my sort of session setup and routing thing. I'm just going to go right ahead and talk about the drums. There's sort of two drum scenes in this song, so to speak. There's the intro sort of first quarter of the song, and then there's the sort of full kit. So I'll talk about the first drums. So there's this kick drum, just sort of a round kick, and I'll show you what I'm doing. I'm just compressing. This kick drum doesn't have a whole lot of tickiness, a whole lot of transient definition, and that's okay with me. I didn't feel like it needed a whole lot of attack, but I felt like I wanted to bring out some. So I'm compressing. Here's with the compressor. Here's without. And then an EQ, just cutting out some lower mid-range kind of woofiness. And then there's this cross stick. I'm EQing, rolling off some low end, just some thud, and then a little bit of harshness in the mid-range. And then I have a trim plugin that's basically acting like a pan pot. It's left, right are unlinked, so the left and right channels are independent of each other, and I'm just taking the right channel down by a dB. I just felt like the snare was leaning a little bit right, so this is bringing it back center. And then I have this SPL transient designer, just barely doing anything. I mean, it's hardly noticeable. Here's without. With, here's more severe. You can hear what it does. That's about where I had it. So that's just taking off some front end from the transient on that snare. And then that snare drum, or the cross stick, is going to snare reverb. This is sort of a mechanical sounding plate reverb. That is, let's see, this guy. Sounds like this. It's an emulation of a Percussion digital reverb by this company, Liquid Sonics. I use this reverb a lot, usually for vocals, but they have a lot of good plates and halls and yeah. Okay, so next I'm using, and then there's another reverb on this cross stick. That's this longer, sort of more lush capital chamber reverb. I believe this is pretty much at default. So, all together. So here's what the kick and snare sound like. The other thing that happens in the intro and a little bit in the pre-chorus is this sort of drum loop. And I'm not doing a whole lot. I'm just taming some transients. This is another transient designer. I like this one a lot because you can instantiate different bands and process them sort of separately. But in this case, I'm not doing it. This is just a full, broadband transient reduction. And then that's going into an EQ, rolling off low end, rolling off some high end, and then doing a dynamic cut in the mid-range, sort of upper mid-range. This goes back to the note that I had in the rough mix where I felt like some of the high end of the drums was competing with the vocal. This is an effort to tame some of that sort of brashness. Another thing I'll say about this entire section is that I'm doing a lot of filtering. As you can see here, there's a low and a high roll off. And what that does is that when the so this intro feels a little bit filtered, a little bit small, so that when the full chorus comes in and the big kick comes in and all of the high frequency elements enter, it opens and feels glossy. So and this is something that I do in every mix, trying to think about the progression of the song and how I can change the sonics and keep things developing without feeling jarring. But add to this sense of growth and development over the course of a mix. So yeah, that's the entire intro drums. I'm going to talk about the main drums now. I'll start with the kick. So this is the kick that Kendall sent me, and I really like it. I like all of that sort of high frequency stuff that's going on. I'll show you what I'm doing here. So I'm rolling off a little bit of lows, a little bit of this sort of boxy lower mid-range. And then I'm doing a high shelf reduction, but just on the right side, I felt like the high frequencies were making the whole kick drum sound like it was skewed right. And so I'm just cutting some of that stuff. Here's without the EQ. And then with. And then there's another kick drum, and this is one that I added in. I I will often add samples. I tend not to flat out sample replace. But if I can't get a kick drum or a snare drum to do what I'm looking for, I feel like it's fair game to reach for a sample. I almost always use Steven Slate Trigger 2 for my sample replacement. It's not here because I've already committed it for the track, but that's what I usually do. I'm just going to play the sample by itself, and then I'll enable my processing. But here's what I added. So this goes back to my note about wanting the drums to hit a little bit harder. I felt like the kick needed just a little bit more sort of oomph in the low end, and then a more defined attack transient. And so that's where this sample comes in. I'm EQing it. I'm just rolling off a little bit of low end, right around 40 hertz. The thing, low end is one of the trickiest things to get right. And when I think about low end, I'm constantly thinking about the kick drum relationship to the bass guitar or synth, whatever's holding down the harmonic bass information. And usually what I'm thinking about is whether I want the subs of the kick drum to give way to the subs of the bass or vice versa. And usually what makes that decision for me, oftentimes it's the actual sounds that I'm given, but a lot of times it's the tempo of the track and the style of the track. If there's a sort of upbeat track like this where the kick drum is kind of busy and doing a lot of syncopated patterns, I'll often roll off low end just because a buildup of subs can sometimes compromise the groove. If there's a lot of sort of low end information ringing on, it can have a negative effect on the bounciness of the groove. So cutting low end in the kick drum, and then I'm adding a compressor, in this case directly inserted on the track. It's just an SSL channel strip. I don't think I'm doing anything else other than compressing. And the idea with this is that I'm just really bringing out that tickiness of the attack. So here's without, and then with. I'll play what those two kicks sound like together. So here's Kendall's kick by itself. And then here's my kick by itself. So as you can hear, neither of them really do the job by themselves. They together sort of form the sound. Next up is the snare drum, and I'm not doing anything on it. Only thing I'm adding is a little bit of that snare verb that I showed earlier, that Seventh Heaven short plate reverb. So here's kick and snare together. Next up is hi-hats. Again, not doing much on either of these. I'm doing there are two. There's this what's called pedal hat. I assume that's someone clamping down on a hi-hat pedal. And I'm just rolling off low end. Here's without that. So this is a case where I think a high-pass filter makes a lot of sense. You can hear that there's clearly sort of low-end information that is not appropriate for the sound, and that would just kind of muddy up the mix. High-passing is an interesting subject. There are a lot of people who only advocate high-passing if you can, if you really need it, if you can hear issues in the low end. And then there are some people who say high-pass anything that's not a kick drum or a bass. I sort of fall somewhere in the middle. I think that to go through and blindly, insert EQ and just high pass everything on a session is not a good approach. But I also think that even if there's low end information, sort of low level, low end information that isn't necessarily audible, but that is still there in a track that doesn't need it, it's often advantageous to get rid of it, because at the end of the day, it's all contributing to the voltage that hits the mix bus, and the more voltage that hits the mix bus, the harder your limiter has to act. So from my perspective, I think that you should always use your ears. But what it usually looks like is if I'm EQing let's say I wanted to EQ this hi-hat and I wanted to cut some harshness maybe in the mid-range. As I'm making that move, it's sort of muscle memory just to roll off some low end. So you'll see that a lot throughout the session, that there are just single instantiations of EQ doing high pass filters. And this is one of them. So that's the pedal, and then there's this hi-hat, this more busy part, again, just cutting low end. And this is getting sent to a room reverb, which I'll activate now. And this is a cool trick I can show. So a lot of times, if I want to pan an element in a certain direction, if I hard pan it, it'll sound jarring and too far out. So one thing that I'll often do is I'll pan it. This is panned left, but it's not severely left, and then I'll send it to a mono reverb or a slap delay and pan that all the way, further in the direction of the source. So in this case, I have a hi-hat that's panned, fairly far left, and then a reverb on that hi-hat that's panned. That's panned right. I have a reverb that's panned, even further right. So it sort of just adds dimension without pulling the listener too far in that direction. Quick thing that I'll say is that if it were a track where it was a live kit, I would be a little more reluctant to pan one hi-hat and one, to one side and the other to the other. In this case, that pedal hi-hat is panned left while the other one is panned right. But because this has programmed drums, I thought it was appropriate. And I'll talk about sort of panning choices and my philosophy with panning a little bit later when I talk about the percussion, but I just wanted to put in a note about that. And then the last hi-hat element is this open hat. I'm just going to mute that. Just an open hat, again, rolling off low end, that's it. And then the last sort of drum element is this sort of breakbeat loop, which, in my mind, I'm treating as a sort of like a room mic. And so what I'm doing is I'm rolling off low end. I'm rolling off a lot of low end in this case, starting, rolling off at 100. And this is because I didn't want this track to step on the toes of the kick drum. I wanted the kick drum to feel very sort of forward, and I didn't want this sort of clouding that. And then again here, there's a cut right around 500, 600 hertz, and that's right where the smack of the snare drum is. So again, sort of EQ cuts to accommodate what's going on with this sort of direct, dry drum signals. Then there's this ozone imager that kicks on occasionally. I'm automating the bypass in a few sections. It's also a level boost there. I'll talk about that transition a little bit later. And then the last thing, there's another little drum loop. Which I am using a decapitator on. This is a sort of audio mangling plugin. Here's without. With. And then an EQ, just filtering highs and lows. Again, this is a situation where, the re-entry to the verse 2, I want it to feel sort of closed and small for a measure or two, and then open back up, just to accentuate that transition. So those are all the drums. I'm just going to play from here. Let me add in the room. So as you can see, I'm not doing any bus processing on the drums. The drums themselves are very lightly processed. I am an advocate of less is more, usually. Sometimes things call for complex chains, but I tend to find that the more shit that gets added onto a chain, uh, it especially with bus processing, I just find that that it can start to sound over processed. So I tend to try and be fairly light-handed. One thing that's very important about the drum processing is this parallel compression setup that I have. So I'll show that. So I'm sending all of the drums to this parallel compression. I'm going to mute the dry drums just so you can hear that. And this goes back to the note that I had about wanting the drums to hit a little bit harder, to smack more. What this compressor is doing is it's accentuating the front end transients of the kick and snare, and then releasing quickly. You know, this is a fast release, so that it's constantly sort of opening and closing, reducing and then releasing, and creates this sort of pumpy, gluey sound that I'm mixing in with the drums to achieve some groove and sort of punch. So here's without that. Here's what all the drums sound like without that parallel compression. I mean, they sound good by themselves, but then with the parallel compressor. Cool. So those are the drums. I'm going to talk about the bass, and then I'll circle back to the percussion. So the bass, I'll just show what I have going on. So my approach with the bass was to make it feel, you know, because the drums are so syncopated and upbeat, there is sort of this syncopated bass line that's happening, but I didn't want it to feel dynamically all over the place. I wanted it to just be steady. I wanted, you know, because the drums are so dynamic, I wanted the bass just to feel like it was sort of like flatlining and holding down the fort. So I'm doing some fairly severe compression, 5 to 10 dB. It's not that severe for a bass, but with this RS-124 compressor plugin, I love this plugin on bass because I find that it achieves what I was just talking about in terms of leveling, but it also adds this character and grit, especially on this cutter mode right here. So here's without that. Obviously a level difference. Then with. Level matching is something I can talk about real quickly. I think, you know, in terms of mixing best practices, it is, you know, often important to, if you're going to insert a compressor or any plugin, you want to make sure, if you're not super familiar with that plugin, that the level when you bypass it is the same as the level as when it's instantiated and on, because you don't want to trick your ears into thinking that the plugin is making the material sound better just by virtue of being louder. With certain, you know, if I'm really critically listening for, you know, mixed bus compression, stuff like that, then I'm pretty meticulous about level matching, unless I know the unit very well. In this case, I know this unit really well. I use it all the time, and so I'm confident, you know, I don't need to listen with a super critical ear to know what it's doing. You know, I can sort of tell immediately, regardless of what the playback level is. So that's the RS-124, and then it's going into an EQ, rolling off just a little bit of low end, and then a cut in this kind of boxy lower mid range. And then these two boosts are interesting. This bass is clearly not played with a pick. But I just wanted to accentuate some of the articulation of that sort of like finger on string sound. So that's what these two little boosts are on the EQ. Okay, so then that bass is going to two parallel processes. There's this distortion. Turn that up so you can hear it. So what am I doing? I'm rolling off low end, and then it's going into a decapitator. In this case, the decapitator is not super fuzzed out. I will often add a fuzzier kind of styled distortion under a bass, but in this case, I wanted the distortion to respond more dynamically to the program material. A lot of times, if you just put a really fuzzy distortion, what you essentially get out of it is a square wave. And in this case, you can hear the distortion reacting to those high peaks. And then a widener. I'll turn that up. EQing out some low end again. This is just a utility plugin monoing the signal, and then I'm micro shifting, which is a widener. Here's without that micro shift. Here's with. Oftentimes I will widen, like on parallel bass, I'll widen the distortion. In this case, I really liked this sort of hollow sound that widening the undistorted bass gave me, so I left it plain. So here's what both of those sound like together. And then with the dry bass. Cool. So that's bass and drums. I'm going to talk about percussion. I'm again not doing a whole lot of processing with this stuff, although there are a few key things that I am doing. So I'm just going to go through and play everything quickly. There's this vocal chop. This is in the intro. And again, here's that filtering, this sort of bandpass filter, rolling off lows, rolling off top end, both to accommodate the brightness of the lead vocal, but also to make sure that by the time the chorus enters, it feels bright and full. And that there's still sort of high frequency energy in reserve for that part to sort of blossom. So high and low cut, and then it's going to a percussion room reverb again. This is the same reverb as the drum room. It's just a Brainworks room reverb. I've frozen it here because since updating to an M1 chip, my this plugin in particular seems to complain a lot. So I've just frozen it. Next up is this record scratch sound, not processing it at all. Then this low zipper, EQing. Again, here's that low cut, and then an LA3A. Just taming some of those spikes. I love the LA3A. Given the choice between an LA2A and an LA3A, I'm almost always one to choose the LA3A. I find it's easier to work with. And I find personally that I can get a more transparent sound out of it. Sometimes an LA2A is called for, but as a sort of like utility plugin, I tend to go with the LA3A. So there's that. That's also going to the percussion room aux. Then there's this high zipper, low cut. I just want to see something here. So in the end of the track, I'm sending that to a percussion mono plate, and I'm panning it further left. Next up is this clave. I'll play without my processing, and then with. So this is just a compressor. I really like this H comp from Waves for sort of just aggressive compression. Here I have a medium attack and a pretty fast release. This is just making that attack of the clave feel like it just punches through and hits hard. Then I have a bongo, and this is where I'll talk about some panning stuff. My philosophy with panning is that both panned rhythmic and harmonic elements should have panned counterpoints on the other side. So that is to say, if there's a guitar, rhythm guitar playing a part on the left, I want something sort of doing a similar thing on the right. It doesn't have to be another guitar, but maybe a keyboard, maybe a synth, some other element, so that the mix doesn't feel skewed to one side. And similarly, from a rhythmic perspective, if I have This is going back to the hi-hats. If I have a hi-hat panned, hard in one direction, I want another high-frequency rhythmic element happening in the other ear, or I just won't pan the hi-hat if there's nothing there. But so this is the clave and bongo relationship are speaking to that, right? The clave is panned left, and the bongo is panned right. Now, another thing is that throughout the course of the song, this goes back to the idea of development over the course of playback. These elements both widen out fairly significantly, right? So the clave to start is panned almost hard left. Oops. By the second pre-chorus, it's panned all the way right, and all the way left. And then similarly with the bongo is panned, sort of midway right to start. And then as more elements enter and as the song, gets more exciting, it goes all the way right. In terms of my processing on this bongo, I'm doing another compressor. This is sort of similar to what the H comp is doing. Very slow attack, fast release. It's letting through that initial transient to just capture the articulation of that hand on drum head sound. And then I'm EQing, again, just accentuating some of that tickiness, and then cutting a little bit of just a little bit of resonance. Then there's this kind of shaker thing. Should just be doing. Okay, this is interesting. I thought I was just going to be doing a low end cut. In this case, I'm doing a high and low cut. Here's without. So without, you can very clearly hear there's a resonance there. So I'm cutting that out with the EQ, and then I'm also removing some top end just to let the vocal air kind of come through again, going back to that note of making sure that the vocal doesn't feel too harsh and like it's competing with the percussion. Next up is a triangle. Again, the only processing that I'm doing is, or the only treatment I'm doing is I'm just panning it further left throughout the course of the song. Another hand drum, this is a conga 1176 again, EQ again, letting through some of the high frequencies. Or rather, accentuating some of those high frequencies. A cowbell with no processing, this little reverse effect, no processing. A tambourine. This reverb was printed into it. This is an interesting treatment. I don't. Not quite sure if I can explain myself here. I don't know. There's a band pass, but then there's a boost in the left side. I'm not sure why I didn't just pan it left. This could be nothing, and then I could have just boosted it and panned it left. But I like to work quickly and sort of work intuitively, and in the moment, I guess this is what I was feeling. So, I'm good with that. Next up is this little bongo break. This happens in the transition going into verse 2, along with that distorted kit. In this case, I'm using an EQ, cutting off low end, and then a sans amp. Kind of doing a similar thing to what a devil lock would do. Here's without. And then that's going to the percussion room. I'll solo isolate that. Pretty significant. Again, just mangling the sound a little bit so that there's this contrast between sort of lo-fi sounds and then glossy, pop sheen. And the last thing is this xylophone that's almost like a synth. And again, a sans amp and a micro shift. Again, just widening it out. Here's without that micro shift. Here's without the sans amp too. So let me just check something real quick. Okay. So that's the rhythm section. That's drums, bass, and percussion. Let me just play that down real quick. And then there's really only one, kind of two, but one main harmonic chordal element, and that's the guitar. And one of the things that I love about this arrangement is that it's exciting, it's engaging. There's all these different moments happening, but it's not dense and overly overplayed. There's just drums, bass, guitar. That's pretty much it. And that really helps the vocal speak clearly. It makes the whole thing feel punchy and loud. So let me just go over what the guitar is doing. There's some constant processing, and then there's some automated processing. So first up, there's an EQ. So disregard this high frequency thing. This cut is not enabled in the song. What is happening is there's a little low roll off, and then when the first pre-chorus comes in, I'm boosting low end in the sides because I can afford to. Like I said, this is the only harmonic chordal element, and so I wanted things to feel a little bit thickened, and because there's not, there aren't a bunch of instruments playing in that range, I could afford to add some oomph in the lower mid-range and the lows. So there's just lower mid-range boost in the side, really a low boost in the side, and then going into an 1176. In this case, it's a medium attack, medium release. Just trying to accentuate some of the finger/pick on strings sound, while also just making the guitar feel a little gluey. Here's without that 1176. With. Cool. And then I'll go over this automated processing soon, but the other thing that I have is this tape plugin. It's a tape emulator from this company, Baby Audio. And here's without. With. So I'm adding a little bit of presence, a little bit of brightness up top. Again, I'll just play that all the way. Just again adding some articulation to that pick on string kind of thing, and then I'm compressing with this glue slider here. Again, just trying to make the strumming feel kind of groovy. And then I have, let's see, a bunch of automated stuff. There's this automated reverb going into this chorus section. Give me one sec. There's a percussion room still playing. I think what probably happened was that the guitar waveform just cut off a little early, so I just threw to a reverb real quick just to make sure it didn't feel abrupt. And then there are some automated things that happen. There's this phase mistress. This is a stereo. Again, the left and right are unlinked, meaning that they're acting independently of each other. Here's the left channel processing and the right channel processing. Again, just slightly tweaked. And what this does is it widens the guitar out a little, but makes it feel like it's a little swimmy, like it's sort of undulating. And this comes in, let's look at that. The phase mistress bypass comes in the first chorus, right? So here's without. And here. You can just hear some happening in the left right. There's this flanger that comes in only for that little transition section in the second verse. And then, very importantly, is this mod delay that enters right at that section. And this really widens out the guitar. This is just a left-right offset, so you can see that the left channel is unaffected, where the right channel is delayed by 24 milliseconds. And this plays with time of arrival cues and makes things feel widened out. And then I'm just sending it to a plate. Here's what that sounds like. Another EMT. Just to add some depth. My approach with reverb with this song is not to make it feel particularly noticeable. In fact, I want everything to feel kind of up close and dry and immediate. But without some reverb, again, certain elements feel a little too bare, a little too raw, and so the reverb just helps seat everything in the track. But hopefully, it's not noticeable as reverb. It's just an effect to add some depth. And then the last harmonic element is this little electric piano, and here's without my processing. Sort of this electric whirly style thing. So I'm adding a Sans amp, bringing some of that zinginess out of the top end. And in some ways, distortion acts as a compressor because it's reducing peaks. So this is taming some of the attack transient. Then I have a compressor. Not doing a whole lot of reduction, and then an EQ likely rolling off low end. Yeah. So the thing with the Sans amp is that it can add a lot of low end, and if you try and deal with that with this low end knob, I find sometimes it's effective, but sometimes it alters the character of the sound too much. So I'll often add an EQ down the chain. In this case, just getting rid of all of that low end stuff that got introduced by the Sans amp, and then a little cut up here just for some harshness. So that's the instrumental. I'm going to play everything. Let's go from here. Great. I'm going to talk about the vocal, the lead vocal. One of the things Kendall mentioned was that the vocal was recorded in different spaces, and so Kendall just wanted me to pay attention to that and make sure that the different sections didn't feel disjointed. I'll be honest that after I ran things through my chain, I didn't really find that the different sections sort of contrasted in an unpleasant way, but I am doing a lot of automated EQ throughout the whole track, so maybe I was subconsciously accommodating for that. But let me just go ahead and play the dry vocal as it came to me. Let's do this.
I wish that I could know you whenever. Hey, stranger. I wish that I could know you and never ever change you. Oh, hey, 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 lone.
So it already sounds a little compressed to my ear, and that's fine. It doesn't sound over compressed to my ear, but just a little note. So the first thing I'm doing is EQ.
Hey, stranger.
Bringing out a little bit of mid-range forwardness, like really not doing a whole lot. This is, a dB.
Hey, stranger.
And then I have a dynamic cut happening right in the sort of lower mid-range just to get rid of some boxiness in Kendall's vocal.
Hey, stranger.
Then it's going into an 1176. It's interesting. I tend to use the CLA 76 from Waves for vocals and the U80 one for other instrumentals. I don't necessarily know why that is. They both sound good. They sound different, but they sound good. In this case, I'm doing a medium attack and a medium fast release. Again, this is trying to accentuate some of the grabbiness, the kind of k's and the g's and the consonants in the vocal, but also adding some leveling.
Hey, stranger. I wish that I could know you and never ever change you. Oh, hey, 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 loner.
Next up is a multi-band compressor, only acting in one band. Again, in that sort of 200, 300 cycles.
Hey, stranger. I wish that I could know you would never ever change you.
Getting rid of some of that, and then an RVox.
Hey, stranger.
Really not doing a whole lot of gain reduction on this compressor.
Hey, stranger.
1, 2 dB here and there. But this, again, goes back to the comment about making sure Kendall's vocal is up front and center of attention. This compressor, both RVox and RComp, just do an amazing job of holding a vocal right in front of the listener. So I find that a little bit goes a long way with these two plugins. And then finally, I'm using another instantiation of this Lindell 80 channel, which I was using on the drum parallel compression. But in this case, I'm using it for, there's sort of three things that I use this plugin for a lot. And I think I'm doing all three in this mix. So I'll talk about that. The first was the compression and the parallel compression. The second one is using the high frequency shelf as a boost. I think that the 16K just sounds really smooth on this on this EQ. So I'm just boosting a little bit at 16. Then I'm sending the vocal to two parallel tracks. One is a sort of compressor widener.
Hey, stranger. I wish that I could know you.
And this is sort of a modified Andrew Shepp's chain. What I'm doing is so the vocal is sending to a parallel aux return, and on that return is inserted a Pultec here. I am attenuating low end right around 100 cycles, and then I am boosting high frequencies at 8K. That's feeding LA2A. In this case, I want the character and the kind of the squeezed sound of the LA2A. So I'm using an LA2A here. Then it's going into another Pultec. In this case, I am attenuating at 10K. And then boosting back 100 hertz before going into a micro shift, which is widening the whole signal. The idea behind this is that it's sort of if the vocal is particularly dynamic, this is just adding some sort of constant sort of harmonic information just to support the vocal so that it again feels like it's sort of up front in your face the whole time. And then the next parallel process is this distortion. And this is the third sort of use case for this unit. And that is to distort the shit out of things. I am it's basically just boosting the preamp. This is a Neve channel strip emulation, and I'm just boosting the preamp on it, basically maxing it out. So it's that going into a micro shift. And then a high and low pass EQ. Here's without. You can hear without, it sounds much too bright. The idea behind this, again, this is sort of in line with my reverb philosophy, which is that ideally you would never hear this, but it just adds thickness to the vocal and makes it feel present and forward. So here's the vocal without any delay and reverb, but with all of its processing and parallel effects.
Hey, stranger. I wish that I could know you would never ever change you. Oh, hey, 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 loner. I wish that I could.
You can see that there's this all vocal sum bus, and I have a decapitator instantiated on it. That's only active in this one section, again, going into verse 2.
You're trapped behind your opaque little wall. There's a side of you you're afraid they will find it.
Right, so just a little perspective shift, this sort of telephone vocal effect, and then it rolls off, or it comes off.
There's a side.
Just a quick thing I've found with this unit, if you're trying to get that telephone effect, I will often boost the tone all the way and then do a high cut. And that just seems to saturate it and drive it in a really nice way. And then there's this EQ I was talking about, and this is something that I do on a lot of tracks.
You gotta know when to live more than you lived before. Doesn't matter what the bad.
So I'll instantiate an EQ. I'll put on a bunch of bands, and then I'll automation arm all of them and do several passes in touch mode, where I'll just, oh, there's a word that needs a little bit of reduction in the low end. I'll just reduce it here, or here there's some high frequency that was bothering me. I just took it down. You could probably hear right there in the chorus, and maybe this is what Kendall was talking about, that there's a lot of noise. Sorry, I'll try not to talk over playback. There's a lot of noise in the vocal. And, this is an interesting thing. I tend to be pretty thorough when it comes to pop and click reduction on a vocal. But unless the noise is, unless it's a ballad or something where it's quite audible, I find that denoising often does more harm than good in terms of all the artifacts that it adds and all of the sort of harmonic information that it can sometimes accidentally take away. So I tend to be light-handed with noise reduction, heavy-handed with pop and click removal. Let me go ahead and show what I'm doing with the reverb. So
you gotta know when to live more than you lived before. Hey, loner.
So there's sort of three main ones that I'm using. I'm using this short room reverb.
Hey, loner. I wish I could know you beneath your surface.
Just adding some liveliness behind the vocal. Again, some depth where it's like you don't hear this as a discrete reverb, but it just adds a little bit of body. Then there's this Capital Chambers again. Just a darker reverb. And here's a cool trick. Actually, never mind. I'm not doing it in this case. I think what likely happened here is that So one thing that I'll sometimes do on reverbs is I will phase invert one side of a stereo reverb. So this is that, right? So the left channel and right channel are unlinked, meaning I'm processing them separately. And the left channel is unflipped, the right channel is flipped. But in this case, when I just opened up this plugin, both of them were phase flipped, which is essentially doing nothing. Or I should say polarity inverted. So I probably listened to it and decided against it, and just left it on. And then the other reverb processing that I have on the main vocal is this this plate setup that's fairly common for me. So what I'll do is I'll send the vocal to two mono plate reverbs. The first one is an EMT 140 again. The second one is another one of those M7 emulations. One is panned hard right, the other one is panned hard left. And they're set to very similar settings, but of course they're different plates, they're different plugins, and so they sound different. And what this does is it achieves just this very wide reverb treatment. So all together, those reverbs are.
Hey, loner. I wish that I could know you beneath your surface.
So it's interesting, right? Like when you hear it by itself, it sounds way more reverby than it is in the track. But when it's in the track.
Hey, stranger. I wish that I could know you would never ever change you.
You don't hear it as being discrete reverb, but if I were to remove the reverb like this.
Hey, stranger. I wish that I could know you would never ever change you. Oh, hey, loner.
The vocal to me sounds very sort of superimposed on the track. So that's my philosophy with reverb. Similar thing with delay. I'm in this song a little lighter handed with delay. I have some automated stuff going on throughout. There's this Echoplex, which is sort of like a delay that's happening on the lead vocal in the bridge.
I've been on the other side. I've been in that sunken place, yes, I've been brushed aside.
Let me go ahead and play that for you. Just the isolated return.
I've been on the other side.
Hang on, sorry.
I've been on the other side. I've been in that sunken place, yes, I've been.
Give me a second. Something's being weird.
Been on the other side. I've been in that sunken place, yes, I've been brushed aside.
Sorry, it's all the way down here. Sorry, so here's that echoplex. So there's a de-esser. Just because having an S hitting a delay and then ping-ponging around can be very distracting. So I'm de-essing, going into this Echo Boy, set to an echoplex setting, and I probably tweaked it a little bit. And then an EQ, just rolling off some harshness up top. Then there's a ping-pong delay. Let's see where that happens. That should be in the choruses. Again, the idea behind this is that when the chorus enters, it should just bloom a little bit more, and this helps add depth and another sort of undulating layer behind the vocal. Then there are these other delays that are being used on the background vocals, but then there are these sort of discrete delay throws that I can show. Let's go to. So, for instance, we have a delay throw in the bridge.
I've been on the other side.
Right. Side, 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 side. And then again, a half note delay getting sent in that second verse.
Behind your opaque little wall, there's a side of you you're afraid they will find him. Prescribed.
My guess is that those are both H delays. Yep. Similar settings, low and high pass filters. Pretty straightforward. So that is the lead vocal treatment. I'll just play a little bit of the chorus with everything in now.
Butterfly open up, you gotta know when to live. More than you lived before, doesn't matter what the past is. You don't wanna miss the chance to be loved.
Okay, next up is doubles and background vocals. I can talk a little bit about my philosophy and approach with these. One of the things that I think works really well with this song is that it sort of integrates gritty lo-fi elements with really like glossy, sparkly treatments. And my approach with the background vocals was that I wanted them to feel a little, not necessarily aggressive, but a little bit pushed, a little bit vintage, and a little bit raw. And so what I'm doing, and I'll show you throughout, is a lot of sort of saturation and sort of pushing mid-range. But let's just go through. Here's the first double. Again, here's that low and high cut. Compressor just keeping it very even and flat, and then a doubler. Because this is a single double happening with the lead vocal, for those two elements to be stacked up right on top of each other can sort of like dilute the potency of the lead vocal being front and center, and so this spreader just gets the double out to the side so that the lead vocal can be the center of attention. Then we have this second double.
Butterfly open up, you gotta know when to live. More.
Little resonant cut, low end and low mid range cut, going into this Avalon kind of channel strip. I've used the hardware version of this, with varying degrees of success. What I will say it's very good for is exactly this, which is like a pushed kind of grainy preamp sound. So I, have the input jacked all the way up, and then it's compressing fairly heavily. Here's without. Again, just that pushed sound. Going into a de-esser. I'll talk briefly about my sort of philosophy with vocal de-essers. I tend to find that a lot of people struggle with de-essing because they're not always using the right mode or the appropriate mode. I typically find that for vocals, the most transparent form of de-essing is when the entire signal is attenuated, meaning that a certain frequency, once it passes the threshold, will trigger the de-esser. But instead of only reducing that triggered frequency, the de-esser reduces broadband. It reduces the entire program material. So for a master, or for drum overheads where you're just trying to tame cymbals, that's not always appropriate. But for a single vocal, when you're trying to de-ess, I often find that that's more transparent than just reducing the high frequencies and then leaving sort of low end stuff that ends up making S's sound kind of lispy. So that's my approach to de-essing. And then again, a doubler. And then I have finally a third double, or I guess you could call it a triple. And again, I'm EQing. Going into a TG. Doing a similar thing as the Avalon. Just a fairly aggressive compressor. And then again, a doubler. Widening it out. And then in this case, I wanted to treat this one a little differently because there's, this is now a tripled part. So the cool thing about this is that I have sort of a Leslie style rotor speaker emulation. Just adding some movement. It's not particularly discernible in the track. Here, I'll play that. Hey, so what if I open up? Gotta know when to live. Lay out down on the floor. Doesn't matter what the past is. Just adding a different sort of texture. And then all of that's going to that UAD capital chamber reverb, the same one that's on the lead vocal. Then there are a few sort of miscellaneous ad-lib kind of things. There's this hey, it's going to a room reverb. That would be likely Valhalla. Yep, Valhalla room. Here's without. Just adding some depth. And then a little breath. Not processing this at all. I should say, by the way, when I talk about depth, what I mean is if you think about a mix in sort of spherical, from a spherical perspective, right? You have, if you're in the middle of a sphere, you have left, right, up, down, and front to back. Left, right is achieved by widening and by primarily by panning. Height can be achieved by your frequency content. That's always the one that seemed to, the most sort of abstract to me. But generally, you want, an even balanced frequency spectrum across the mix. But then depth refers to sort of front to rear dimension, and the way that I'm adding that is by a bunch of different delays and reverbs. And so that room reverb on that hey doesn't necessarily read as reverb, but without it, it becomes much more one-dimensional. Okay, and then we have a bunch of stacks. Let's go. Hang on. There's this first one. EQing, getting rid of some harshness in the mid-range, and then going into this dual left-right compressor. I've talked about this compressor a lot, and I use it fairly frequently on background vocals. You can see here that I have the detection mode set to dual left-right, meaning that if there's a sudden spike in the left channel, the compressor won't reduce the right channel. It will only reduce the left channel, and vice versa. And this is very useful for things like background vocal stacks, where you don't want certain phrases or certain vocals sort of poking out. You want it to feel just very flat and even, so as not to distract from the lead vocal. This is what I reach for. It's probably, doing 5-10 dB of reduction. And then this is going to a little tape slap. In this case, it's probably an Echo Boy. Yep. Here's that. It doesn't sound like delay because the feedback is set to 0, but that is delayed by 74 and 90 milliseconds per side. So this is a widened short slap. And then it's going to, let's see, that same room reverb, and then the Echoplex that I showed earlier. I'm going to go ahead, unmute a bunch of stuff. And then moving on to this next background vocal thing. Butterfly. Again, in a song where I want the background vocals to feel a little more contained and a little more, a little less sort of brash, I would spend time sort of seating them better in the track. But I kind of liked how these two vocals sounded just really hard pan. You can hear both of them, exactly what each part's doing. So I'm just compressing. And then EQing, just a high frequency roll off to make room for some of the high frequency in the drums and the main vocal. Butterfly, open up. You gotta know when to live more than you lived before. Doesn't matter what the past is. You don't wanna miss. And then there's this little background vocal stack again, getting rid of some kind of harshness around 10K, doing a low end roll off. This is pretty typical, where I'll do a little low end roll off and then a little dip right in the same zone in the lower mid range. And then a TG 1 2 3 4 5 channel strip. This is again a pretty aggressive compressor, and you can see again I'm doing duo, which means that the left and right channels are acting independently of each other. You can see that if I move this left channel in duo mode, I'm able to adjust the gain independent of the right channel. But if I put it back in stereo mode, now they both move together. So that's that compressor. And then looks like I'm just automating an EQ bypass. Let's see where. I guess this one little part felt a little dense in the lower mid-range. You don't want and I can't help but give me a chance. I might last, yeah, 'cause I've been on the other side. And then in terms of my effects treatment, you can see I'm automating a bunch of stuff. I got you, someone to confide in. By the way, there's nothing wrong with you, Jack. That little last background vocal phrase coming into that pre-chorus, I just love how textural that feels. So I wanted to reduce some of the. I'm reducing the ping pong there. I'm reducing the 16th note delay. I'm reducing. Not that. So this is actually doing a different thing that I can talk about. So there are a few throws that are happening here, going into the bridge and coming out of the song. I can't help but give me a chance. I might let. You can hear. Goes to this hall, which I believe would just be a Valhalla vintage verb in default setting. Let's go see that. Yep. There's that. And then should also be going to a lexicon 480. Yep. Can look at that. 480L. I use this plugin a lot. There's this sort of tweaked preset that I have, basically a long haul, very long reverb, 7.5 second long decay. That's that background vocal stack, and then there are a few other background vocals. There's at the very end of the song, there's this sort of counterpoint, sort of two dueling lead vocals. I'll play that. Again, this sort of filtered lo-fi sound. So there's this.
Butterfly, open up. You gotta know when to leave.
EQ. You know, could I have just done, could I have gotten rid of maybe this? Or, whoops, sorry. Could I have gotten rid of this and rolled this up more? Yeah, sure. But again, sort of moving quickly, spur of the moment. This is what I was feeling with it. So it's EQ going into this, another Avalon cranked preamp.
Butterfly, open up. You gotta know when to live.
And compression, and then into this Moog EQ boosting 40 kilohertz. This EQ is known for its air band. This is just adding brightness and air in the top end. And then I have
there's nothing wrong with
this much more sort of gritty filtered vocal.
By the way, there's nothing wrong with your jacket lines.
Much more sort of telephony. I'm cutting high end and low end, going into a compressor.
There's nothing wrong with your jacket lines. You got something inside you that they can't.
Compressor again. In this case.
By the way, there's nothing wrong with your jacket lines. You got something inside you that they can't stratify.
In this case, my frequency detector is lower in the mid range, just trying to tame some harshness. And then a soothe.
By the way, there's nothing wrong with your jacket lines. You got something inside you that they can't stratify.
Again, just soothing some harshness.
'Cause I might last. I know you got those things that you don't want, and I can't help it.
And then playing around with some delay throws. You can see that there's this echoplex throw, and then this tape slap. And then the final thing is this little outro vocal, which starts very dry. Again, here's a utility gain. Actually, in this case, it looks like it's linked. I'm just doing a 6 dB gain reduction. And then automating the dry wet of this little reverb, basically doing a reverb throw. Cool. So that's the whole track. That's that's all the individual components. I'm just going to talk quickly about bus processing, and then I'll wrap things up. So the first thing that's happening is before I'm hitting the mix bus, I'm parallel processing the entire mix with another instantiation of this tape plugin from Baby Audio. In this case, I'm boosting high end a lot, and I'm also boosting glue all the way. Just giving it kind of a baked, gritty sound, and that's getting blended in with the main signal, which I can show you now. First thing in the mix bus is this SSL G bus compressor.
Oh hey, hey.
Here's without.
Oh hey, 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 loner.
Actually, let me play you a section where the drums are fully in.
Butterfly, open up.
Without.
You gotta know when to live more than you lived before. Doesn't matter what the past is. You don't want
and to my ear, it just really brings out the grooviness of the kick drum. I use this. This is not a utility compressor for me, but when the music is upbeat and groovy, I tend to reach for this one. Next up is this SPL compressor I've been really digging lately. I actually typically don't use it on songs like this that are so. If the SSL plugin is my sort of like upbeat groove based compressor, this is sort of my like slower ballady, sort of almost like a Fairchild compressor. Um, but I thought it sounded good on this, and I used it because I thought that the whole mix called for some thickening, and this really helped. So what you can see here is that I'm boosting the input by 2 dB and then reducing the output by 2 dB, but I'm acting in mid side mode, so that's just on the center channel that's happening, and then the sides I'm doing no boosting or gain reduction. Slow attack, fast release on both.
Butterfly open up, you gotta know when to live. More than you lived before, doesn't matter.
So what you can see here is that because I'm boosting the center into or I'm boosting the mids into the compressor is acting more dramatically on the mids, and also there's just the center is louder than the sides, so you can see that it's hitting about 1.5 dB of gain reduction, whereas the sides are only about 0.7, half a dB. And so what that means is that the sides are basically coming up relative to the mids, and it's just adding some body and weight to the sides. So here's without that plugin.
Butterfly open up, you gotta know when to live.
And then with.
More than you lived before, doesn't matter what the past is. You don't wanna miss the
Yeah, I just really like what it's doing for the sort of tonal characteristics of the sound more than anything else. Then an EQ. This is another, going back, sort of speaking to the developing the mix over time. You can see that so for the first sort of quarter of the song, this is in bypass, but when the first chorus kicks in, there's a little low end boost.
butterfly open up.
Really in the subs is very low.
More than you lived before, doesn't matter what the past.
Just adding some oomph body to it. And then similarly, at the end of the song, there's a little high frequency boost on this Kirchhoff EQ. You can see inactive, 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 inactive until the last chorus, where there's just this little boost up here. One quick thing without getting too technical is that whenever you instantiate and use EQ, there is phase shift in some degree. If I am EQing lower frequencies, I tend to use the EQ in its default, low latency, out of the box mode, because while there is post ring to the phase shift, meaning that there's ring out of the frequency that you're adjusting. If you were to do a linear phase EQ, which is what I'm doing here on the high end, the linear phase EQ adds pre-ring to the sound. So I find in my experience that I only do linear phase EQ in mid-range and high frequencies, because those frequencies are less offensive when there's pre-ring, whereas when there's, if I were to go like this in the low end, it would sound it could sound sort of muddy and jumbled. So I'm using two different EQs to achieve these boosts, right? I'm using the Fab filter with 0 latency mode for the low end boost, and then the Kirchhoff. The Kirchhoff actually has this mixed mode where you can set, above a certain frequency it will act in linear phase mode, and below a certain frequency it'll act in minimum regular sort of mode. But I'm not doing this here because just for the convenience of automating two plugins. And then the last thing that I'm doing is this Pultec style EQ. This is the Better Maker EQ, and this is active throughout the entire track. And this is doing a lot of heavy lifting. I'm boosting. You can see 12K with a very broad bandwidth.
hasn't been too kind.
And then again, I'm doing the sort of classic Pultec boost and cut at the same frequency. You see I'm boosting at 20 hertz and cutting at 20 hertz. And what that does is something like this. So you get a little low end boost, and then just above it, you get a reduction. And that can often sort of help the low end speak clearly. So here's without the Better Maker.
Hasn't been too kind to the outcasts, to the misfits, and to the ones who can't find a box to fit in.
So you can hear it adds this glossy sheen to the whole thing. It's almost like Windex for the mix. And then finally, I'm doing limiting, and I'm really not doing that much.
Butterfly, open up. You gotta know when to live more than you lived before. Doesn't matter what the past is. You don't wanna miss.
A dB here and there. Some tracks call for more limiting, but with this one, because the transient detail was so important to preserve and capture, I thought that the less limiting, the better. I'm still getting it up to a competitive, appropriate mix level. I think I was just hitting a short-term LUFS value of like -14, -13, and that's generally around where I like to sit anyways. So yeah, that's the whole mix. I guess what I'll do now is I'm just gonna play maybe that verse 2 into the bridge a little bit, and I'll just toggle between my mix and Kendall's rough mix so you can hear how it started and how it ended. So I'll start with Kendall.
Hey, little wolf, there's inside of you, you're afraid they will find him. Won't prescribe the little verdict, try to hide it, but I got you, someone to confide in. And that way, there's nothing wrong with your jacket light. Got something inside you that they can't stratify, babe. I know you got those things that you don't want, and I can't help but give me a chance. I might last, yeah, 'cause I've been on the other side. I've been in that sunken place, yeah. I've been brushed aside. Not everyone will see you in a beauty, but in my eyes is your reflection. Yes, I see you clearly. So butterfly, open up. You gotta know when to live more than you lived before. Doesn't matter what the past is. You don't wanna miss the chance to be loved, 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 to be loved. Got something inside you that they can't stratify. I know you got those things that you don't want, and I can't help but give me a chance.
Cool. So hopefully that was useful. Gives you a sense of sort of where I took things with the mix. Big thank you to Kendall for letting me use this song to show. I will include a link where you can listen to the song in its entirety in the description of this video. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. I'm hoping to do another one of these soon, so stay tuned for that. And yeah, take care.